The paper that I'm going to present is joint work with Kara Ebert and Bernd Weber, who are also at RWI. And in the paper, we assess an information experiment that we conducted in Ghana and Uganda in 2020 and 2021. The experiment consisted of providing study participants with basic information on regional average incomes, emphasizing the differences across regions to see whether this affects individuals' migration preferences. Why did we decide to do this experiment? Why do we think this is of interest and of relevance? Internal migration is a very prominent phenomenon throughout the world. Globally, 1 in 8 people are internal migrants. And also in our study setting, it is very prominent, with 25% of household heads living in another region than their region of birth in Ghana. And in Uganda, it's 20% of the household heads. Economic theory would now predict that in the absence of frictions, these migration flows should vanish any differences across regions over time. However, this is not the case, and one continues to observe large differences, for example, in terms of income. And this is, again, also the case in our specific study setting of Ghana and Uganda, with per capita income in Greater Accra being more than 6 times the per capita income in the Upper East region, and in Uganda, wages in Kampala are 2.5 times the wages in Western Uganda and Eastern Uganda. One explanation why returns to migration are not fully exploited is that, in contrast to theory, markets do have frictions. So migration decisions are based on perceived costs and individuals' perceived benefits, and therefore information frictions might result in some individuals not intending to migrate because they are not aware about the potential returns of it. So providing correct and easily understandable information might therefore be a promising tool to inform about returns to migration, and that's exactly what we did here. So today's talk will deal with the question whether information about regional incomes affects within country migration intentions. I will present the implemented experiment in more detail, provide you some more details about our setting and the empirical approach, as well as the contribution to literature, and then we will discuss in more detail the results. Here you already see a preview of our main results. First, we find that in our setting, people indeed misperceive regional incomes and income differences across regions. Second, providing information on regional incomes does affect migration intentions only to some extent, but substantially corrects destination preferences towards higher income destinations. Third, our results show that individuals update their beliefs in an asymmetric way. Our fourth finding is that the observed updating is persistent even after 1.5 years. And our last finding is that updating of beliefs does not translate into actual migration behavior, even though this updating is very persistent. So with this intervention and the analysis, we contribute to existing literature in 3 broader ways. We add to the literature identifying information frictions as one relevant barrier to migration. Existing literature so far focuses on international and especially irregular migration. One exception is the paper from Basler of 2019, which looks at rural-urban migration in Kenya. But in contrast to Basler, we look at urban migration, so within urban areas and among skilled workers. So this is very unique in our setting. Our second contribution is that we provide experimental evidence on the relevance of economic conditions at destination within the migration decisions, or more precisely, for whether individuals want to migrate and where they want to migrate to. And our third contribution is to the literature on belief updating by providing evidence that also in the context of migration, encouraging information might be processed differently than discouraging information, which is known as asymmetric belief updating. So what exactly did we do in our experiment? The information experiment was embedded in a longer questionnaire conducted with study participants of 2 impact evaluations, one in Uganda, one in Ghana. And in both countries, participants were asked about first their intentions to migrate internally, then everyone was asked about their top 2 destination preferences in terms of regions, and this was irrespective of whether they initially indicated that they want to migrate or not, so everyone was asked. Then they were asked about their income expectations for the different regions of their respective country. A random subsample of 50% then received our information. The other one didn't receive any information. And then, irrespective of treatment status, everyone was asked again about their intentions to migrate internally and their top 2 destination preferences. And the whole procedure, as well as the outcomes and the analysis that I'm going to show you in a bit, were pre-registered. Here you see how the treatment looked like in Ghana. So study participants were shown this map indicating the average monthly per capita income for the 10 different regions of Ghana, as last reported by the Ghana Living Standard Survey of 2017. And participants were distributed across Accra, Kumasi, Tamale, and Takoradi. So Accra is in Greater Accra, Kumasi is in the Ashanti region, Tamale is in the northern region, and Takoradi is in the western region. However, and important, all participants in Ghana, as well as in Uganda, were craftsmen. I must say here that the figure that you see for Ashanti and that participants saw for Ashanti, this 4,700, is wrong. We took the information, and so all figures from the official report of the Ghana Statistical Office, and this 4,700 was the number that was in the report. Only later, when checking the raw data, we had to realize that the numbers differed from those reported in the official report. So we contacted the statistical office, and they later confirmed that they indeed made a mistake. So once we got this confirmation, all the treated individuals were debriefed. But for our analysis, we continued to observe this figure because that was the actual information that we provided and that participants used to update their beliefs or not. But I didn't want to provide you also with wrong information, so that's why I added this here. And in Uganda, participants received information on sex-specific median monthly wages for each region of Uganda. As the interviews in Uganda took place during the Ugandan lockdown in 2020, in-person interviews were not possible, but we had to do it via phone surveys, so we couldn't show a map. Instead, the enumerators read out the information and explained the differences verbally. So this is how an exemplary script for a male respondent living in northern Uganda looked like. So we had first a short intro on what we're going to explain them. Then we told them always first the information for the region they are living in, and then for other regions, always telling them the value for this other region, and then putting it into perspective compared to the region where they are living, such that it's easier to understand.
Sarah?
Yes?
What about cost of living differences?
So we focused on income. Cost of living expenses were not included in our information, and I'm going to tell you in a bit why. And in Uganda, individuals, so participants, were spread across all 5 regions, and they were also all craftsmen. So now coming to Felix's questions on why we provided the content that we provided. So our experiment concentrates only on information about income. Obviously, income is not the only relevant aspect within individuals' migration calculus. We have cost of living expenses, we have unemployment or general employment opportunities, but income within this migration calculus is a very important factor, and for our experiment crucial. It is one of the few aspects for which we had official statistics at a regional level, which is super difficult in developing countries. So we wanted to provide official statistics instead of anecdotal evidence to be sure we really provide them official data. And this was not possible for cost of livings, for example, because that's on a regional level not available. We also decided to provide average income information instead of sector-specific information, although we had this sector-specific sample of craftsmen. And we decided to do that because only like this, we could make sure that the information is also relevant for individuals who do not work in the construction sector. So for example, if treated individuals share the information with family or friends, or if the treated individual themselves decide to change the sector. But what we can also see is that cross-sectoral income strongly correlates with sector-specific income. So this is what you see here. On the y-axis, you see the income in the construction sector. This graph is for Ghana, this one is for Uganda, and on the x-axis you see the income across all industries. So the information that we provided, and you see that incomes strongly correlate. So it wouldn't actually make a huge difference whether we show cross-sector, whether we show the income across all industries as we did, or if we would have shown the construction sector specific income information. And the information that we provided also strongly correlates with the sample specific income. So when looking at the income of study participants in the different regions. Before we move to the analysis, let me first show you participants' income expectations prior to receiving our information. The upper graph is for Ghana, the lower one is for Uganda, and the bars indicate the average expected monthly income as indicated by the respondents for the different regions of the country, and the black dots indicate the true monthly income. And here for Ashanti, you see the corrected figure, so you don't see the one that we showed them, but the one that should have been in the report but wasn't. And so we can easily see that in both countries, individuals overestimate income levels, with the overestimation being much more pronounced in Uganda, with sometimes being more than double the true value for some regions in Uganda.
And just Sarah, sorry.
Yes.
A pretty naive question, but do we have an explanation for the systematic under-representation of incomes, or not in particular?
No.
No, okay, it was just to
no, maybe that they are too optimistic, especially those in Uganda. So the Ugandan sample was younger, and they were not yet in the labor market mostly. So they did a vocational skills training to start in the craftsman sector basically, whereas in Ghana it was more like a top-up training. So participants were already in the craftsman sector and received a top-up training, and so with these people we did their experiments. So they were slightly different. So maybe that could be one explanation why the overestimation is more pronounced in the Ugandan setting, because they don't have that much labor experience, work experience.
Okay, thank you.
So the misperception can not only be observed in the levels, but also when looking at the differences. So here you see the expected income difference between the home region and the potential destinations. And we continue to observe this misperception. So now let's move to the analysis. For all estimation regressions, we use the following structure. So the post-treatment outcome is regressed on the treatment status. We control for pre-treatment outcome is available for and the set of pre-treatment control variables at the individual level. And we also include region of residence fixed effects. We use two groups of outcomes. So first, internal migration and then destination preference. Internal migration intentions are measured on a 4-point Likert scale, varying between 0 and 1. And for destination preferences, we have a set of 4 different variables. One variable being a dummy variable for selecting the first and or the second preference according to the true income maximization. We have a continuous variable indicating the logarithmized income in US dollar at the respective destination preference. We have a categoric variable for the income ranking of the destination preference. And then we have another dummy variable for selecting a destination that has a higher income than the income in the current home region. Whether our experiment provides new information or not strongly depends on individuals' initial perceptions of regional incomes, and therefore in our analysis we will always use 3 different samples. So we will use the total sample, and then we will use 2 subsamples. In the first subsample, we only include individuals who initially underestimated the highest possible regional income difference based on their home region, and for those we would expect that as a response to the information treatment, their maximum expected income differential should have increased after the treatment. And in the tables, this is going to be marked as D hat with an arrow pointing to the top. And then the other subsample is going to include individuals who initially overestimated the highest possible difference. And for those, we would expect that the maximum expected income differential decreases as a response to our treatment. And in the output tables, this is going to be marked with the D hat and an arrow pointing downwards. So let's look at our effects. Here you see the effect of receiving income information on individuals' intentions to migrate. In panel A, we see the ITT results from OLS regressions with migration intentions as outcome and the treatment dummy indicating the randomly assigned treatment status as explanatory variable. The first 3 columns of each table are always going to show the results for Ghana, the last 3 ones for Uganda. And then in each country sample, the first column is the total sample. The second column is the subsample of individuals who underestimated. And then the third column is the subsample of individuals who overestimated prior to the treatment. For Ghana, we see that the experiment had no effect for the total sample, nor for those who initially overestimated, but we see that it had a migration encouraging effect for those who initially underestimated. So intentions increased by 1.1 percentage points among those who underestimated, which is an increase of 1.4% relative to the control mean. And in Uganda, we see that the information provision had a significant negative impact on migration intentions for the total sample, which is driven by the subsample of individuals who initially overestimated. And here, on average, the information provision resulted in a reduction of migration intentions by 4.6 percentage points. We additionally run IV regressions to account for the fact that the treatment intensity might have differed across enumerators because some enumerators explain the treatment in more details than other enumerators. So we use random treatment assignment as an instrument for actual treatment delivery, with treatment delivery being proxied by the display duration of the map in case of Ghana, or the text of the treatment in case of Uganda. And
Sarah, we just have a clarification question from Thomas asking if he's reading the table right, saying that 80% of people say they intend to migrate.
Sorry, yeah, you mean the control mean? Yes, exactly. So it's not, so the control mean, so the intention to migrate is measured on a scale from 0 to 1, 0 meaning not at all, and 1 meaning a lot. So it's not that 78% say that they want to migrate, it's even more positive, because very little person, so only a very small share indicates that they don't want to migrate at all. Almost everyone at least wants to migrate to some extent. So that's the average score, varying from 0 to 1. Yeah, thanks for the clarification question. So where did I stop? So with the IV estimations, I explained why we did that. And when looking at the results, we see that they are almost identical. And that's why in the next, for the next outcomes, I will only concentrate on the OLS estimations, because IV results and OLS results are always as similar as here. So to save some time, I focus on OLS. We also run ordered logit regressions to see how exactly individuals change their answers on this 4-point Likert scale for migration intentions. And for both countries, we see that the previously detected effects are driven by a change in the probability to select a lot as a response. So for Ghana, we see that the probability to select a lot increased by 2 percentage points, whereas the probability to select one of the lower categories of intention to migrate reduces. And in Uganda, it's the other way around. So the probability to select a lot reduces, whereas the probability to select one of the lower categories increases. When looking now at the effects on destination choices, we see that in both countries, the information provision led to a significant correction of individuals' destination choices towards the region with the maximum income gains. And even though the significant positive effect is observed in the total sample, in both countries, the results are driven by the subsample of individuals who initially underestimated the regional income differences. So only among those for whom the treatment had a kind of migration encouraging effect. In Ghana, the probability to select the region with the highest income as first destination choice significantly increased by 4.7 percentage points among those who underestimated, which is an increase of 10.4% relative to the control mean. And in Uganda, the probability increased by 13.2 percentage points, with this, which is an increase of 80% relative to the control mean. In both countries, we don't observe any effect for those who initially overestimated the differences. So those who should have perceived the treatment as migration discouraging. And the correction that I just told you can only be observed for the first destination preference, but not for the second destination preference, and therefore also not when looking at first and second preference jointly. So in the some slides ago, I told you that we have 4 different outcomes for destination preferences, and here you see the 3 other ones. So we have logarithmized income in US dollar at destination. We have the income ranking at destination, and we have the dummy whether the selected destination has a higher income than the home region. And when looking at those three alternative outcomes, we see exactly the same picture. So for all three alternative outcomes, we see a positive effect of the information provision. After having received information, individuals were more likely to select higher income regions as the destination preference than individuals who did not receive the information. And again, this positive effect in the total sample is driven only by individuals who initially underestimated the regional income differences, and we don't observe any differences for those or any updating for those who initially overestimated. So to better understand how study participants corrected their choices, we also run multinomial probit regressions, indicating the effect of the information provision on the probability to select a certain region. And here, on the left graph, you see the results for Ghana, and on the right graph, you see the results for Uganda. And we can nicely see that the treatment led to a significant increased probability among the Ghanaian sample to select the Ashanti region as first destination preference. And for Ugandan people, we see an increased probability to select the Kampala as first destination preference. And this is exactly what we would expect, because these are the regions for which we showed the highest income in the respective country. And again, we only observe this increased probability for the subsample of individuals who initially underestimated. In Ghana, we had the opportunity to interview participants again 18 months after the implementation of the experiment. So, and when asking treated and control participants again about their migration preference, so in terms of intentions and destination preference, we saw that treated individuals who underestimated continued to have an increased probability to select the destination preference such that they maximize the income differential for the region of residence. So this is what you see here. So the probability to select the first and the second destination preference according to the true income maximization. And for the subset of individuals who initially underestimated, we continue to observe this increased probability. In general, we observe an increased probability to select destination preferences with higher incomes in general. So this is the result when looking at average income level at selected destination preference. So we continue to observe this increased probability. And then we, of course, also looked at actual migration behavior. So where did treated individuals end up living in other regions, and did they end up living in other regions to a higher extent than those who did not receive the information experiment? But we don't see anything. So there is no effect on having migrated. So this is just migration, yes or no. There's also no effect on having migrated to a higher, to a region with a higher income. And there's also not a difference. We also don't observe any effect when looking at the income difference obtained through migration. So basically 3 different variables that we tried out to see whether information treatment had any effect on actual migration behavior. So the underlying theory of change of our experiment is that the provided information affects individuals' region-specific income expectations, and this will then subsequently affect their migration preference. And this table shows us that this is actually what happens. So in Uganda, after the experiment, participants were asked about their expected earnings in 5 years. And these questions were asked completely unrelated to our experiment. So there were several other questions in between, so really no link to the experiment. And we see that treated individuals in Uganda report substantially lower expected earnings than control individuals. On average, they report monthly earnings that are 78 Ugandan shilling lower than those of the control group. And given that Ugandan participants on average overestimated income levels for all regions prior to our treatment, this is exactly how we would expect them to update. So they had higher income expectations. The information showed them that incomes are lower. And as a consequence, they correct their expectations downwards. Unfortunately, we only have this information for the Ugandan subsample, though. We also looked at several dimensions that moderate our results. The first moderator, which we already discussed, are prior income expectations. So we saw that destination preferences are only updated among individuals for whom the information had a migration encouraging character. Additional analysis also revealed that only individuals with slighter deviations of their income expectations update their intentions and destination preferences. We don't observe an effect among those whose expectations are very far off. And this also somehow makes sense because these might be the individuals who didn't take the exercise too seriously, and so we don't observe an update for them. Another moderator could be prior migration preferences and here the hypothesis could go into both directions. So either those with higher migration intentions are more interested in our information and therefore update more strongly, but on the other hand, those with higher intentions could also be more informed in the beginning. So no updating really happens because they are already well informed. And here we don't find any significant difference in effects across individuals who have higher pre-treatment migration intentions versus individuals who have lower pre-treatment migration intentions. Lastly, the understanding of the trust in and the perceived relevance of the provided information might also moderate the effects. And here, the consistency of our results and the subsample analysis by over and underestimation already provides very strong evidence that individuals understood and trusted the information, because otherwise we wouldn't see this persistent effects. And additionally, the follow-up study in Ghana reveals that 1/3 of the treated individuals still remember the provision of information, and among those who remember, the large majority indicated that they trusted the information and that they perceived the information as relevant for them personally. We also looked at heterogeneity in the treatment effects by participants' cognitive skills and educational level, and the results don't suggest that some subgroups didn't understand the provided information or that they understood it better than other subsamples. So lastly, interventions using self-reported outcomes are often prone to demand effect biases. So here I want to say that our experiment did not take place in the lab environment, but instead within a longer questionnaire for the evaluation of an unrelated vocational skills training program. But in addition to that, we try to limit potential concerns of demand effects so we told the enumerators that they should always emphasize the anonymity of responses. And we also let a subsample of Ghanaian respondents select the answer options themselves. So enumerators explained the question, explained the answer options, and then they handed over the tablet to the respondents. And the respondents selected the answers. The tablet automatically swiped to the next question, so enumerators couldn't see the answer. And we don't observe any differential effects across the subsamples. For another subsample in Ghana, enumerators again emphasize that responses will not affect the chances of being selected for the training program for which they registered. And again, we don't observe any differences. So these several checks, with these several checks, we try to limit potential concerns here.
Sarah, you have about less than 5 minutes left.
Okay, that's perfect. I'm almost done. The results are also robust to excluding participants of regions with the highest income, so Ashanti and Kampala. They are also robust to excluding participants with no intentions to migrate at all, and they are robust to excluding participants with partially missing information on outcome variables. So let me conclude. We showed that in our study setting of Ghana and Uganda, substantial knowledge gaps remain with regards to regional incomes and income differences across regions. The implemented experiment was able to partially affect whether individuals want to migrate or not, but had stronger and consistent effects on where individuals want to migrate to, namely those regions where they maximize their income gains. We also showed that belief updating in terms of destination choices happens asymmetrically and depends on whether the provided information encourages or discourages migration. And we saw that only those who should have perceived the information as migration encouraging updated their beliefs. The follow-ups in Ghana proved that this observed updating is not just some meaningless short-term change which then fades away, but we continue to observe these corrected beliefs even after 18 months after the experiment. Nevertheless, we don't observe an increase in actual migration behavior. For future information campaigns, this implies that even light touch interventions can have persistent effects. With our design, we decided to guide destination preferences instead of trying to discourage individuals from migrating, and we showed that this can be achieved by providing official statistics instead of anecdotal evidence. And while our intervention had lasting effects on individuals' intentions, we could not impact migration behavior. And this again shows that the complexity of the migration calculus. The results of our analysis suggest that to impact actual migration behavior, correcting information might not be enough, but that also relevant aspects like networks, job search, employment opportunities might need to be addressed to such that information campaigns can affect actual migration behavior. And with this, I close and look forward to discussion.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So now we give the floor to Ernesto, who's going to discuss this paper from like 5 to 10 minutes. Ernesto, I'll let you share your slides.
Thank you. Great. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss this paper. I really like it, and I hope that these comments are going to be useful for Sarah and her co-authors. So, very briefly, this paper does an information experiment in Ghana and Uganda. It measures and corrects perceptions of income or wages. I feel like this is important depending on the country, in different potential destination regions. The results are that respondents marginally change both the desire to migrate and the places of migration, right? The ranks, and the effects are concentrated on respondents who underestimate income or wages in Ghana and overestimate them in Uganda. So that's the full picture. I think this paper has 3 main contributions. One, it provides evidence of information frictions in migration decisions, right? It shows that this is a relevant dimension. Second, it documents this pattern across 2 different countries, right? Not only 1, but 2, and particularly in different regions within these countries. And 3, it contrasts the effects of upward versus downward updating, which I think is one of the most interesting parts of the paper, right? How in one country people who underestimate react in a certain way, and people who overestimate react in another way. So I have a set of comments. So let me start. The first one is that I think the paper could do a better job at explaining how these research challenge our priors. In which particular way? Well, first, whether namely, if we didn't know that this was happening, would we expect to see these types of results? Or we would expect to see different types of results? Do we care about the magnitudes? So I think that a more thorough framing would be useful in the beginning. Relatedly, it's unclear how these results compare with similar interventions in maybe other contexts, or with other types of information experiments related to migration or unrelated to migration. I think it's important to see whether these effects are large, relative to other interventions, or not that large, or pretty much the same. I think it would be very useful either at the beginning, but especially at the end, to have the discussion about relative effects. It's unclear to me why we observe an effect on people who underestimate in Ghana but overestimate in Uganda. Why do we think this is the case? It's an interesting result, but I think the paper does not thoroughly explain why we observe this difference. It seems to me that and the authors recognize that the effect sizes are small, or relatively small, right? However, they don't really explain why this might be the case. And they do say that, well, median or average, depending on the country, income or wages is just one type of information signal that might shape migration decisions. There might be other ones, and maybe these ones are not that informative. I'm thinking about percentiles, I'm thinking about other types of information that maybe would be more relevant to them. I think the comparison with construction is quite useful because it tells us, well, these might be the relevant margin, but still, I think that it would be good. It would be worth discussing whether we think that at the end people use this type of information and not others. When reading the paper, I thought of two other papers that I find very interesting, and so I was wondering whether now a posteriori, now that your data collection has finished, whether you could explore how this information, the information that you guys provided, relate to upward mobility, which I think might be a more relevant information. Like, what are my chances if I move somewhere else to move up in the socioeconomic ladder? And I'm thinking of this great paper, Intergenerational Mobility in Africa. I think this paper has regional information for many countries. I think it has for for Ghana for sure. Uganda, I don't remember, but maybe you can see whether you can use their data and do further analysis with intergenerational mobility. Maybe just simply whether it correlates well their measure of intergenerational mobility with information that you provided. And the other one is just this paper of intergenerational mobility and preferences for redistribution, because that is right another margin that could affect migration decisions. Then you recognize that people who overestimate income or wages are quite different to those that underestimate them. So it would be very useful to be explicit about the exact variation that you're exploiting when you're dividing the sample, right? Because you also use certain fixed effects. So net of the fixed effects, exactly who these people are and what is the type of comparison that you guys are doing. I would spend more time and more space describing the different estimations in detail. I think in the presentation, it was very useful to have those two charts. Because I think, given that you analyze many outcomes and that there are all these regions, it would be very clear to say, look, in the beginning, we're just comparing decisions to migrate, no matter where. And then we go in detail and we separate the samples in this way. I think it would be clear for the reader to understand exactly what type of comparisons you're doing. It is strong to me that the samples of these countries are very different. There might not be very different from the whole population of the country, but you're comparing very different samples. the marriage rates are extremely different, the employment rates, even the education, depending on the group, they're very, very different populations. So, well, that on the one hand. And on the other hand, the number of respondents from Uganda is just 16%. That number of respondents from Ghana. So your sample from Uganda is significantly smaller than your sample from Ghana. So I don't know whether these two issues, the samples being qualitatively different and the samples being quantitatively different, might be the reason why you observe effects in some places, or certain effects in some places, or in some countries, in one country and not the other. I think you could further discuss it and try to play with this fact. I'm unsure why you guys did not explore the variation in migration history. Have a graph, I think is a chart is A3 in the appendix, in which you ask people whether they are themselves migrants, and there's huge variation there. So I feel like that would be very interesting. Maybe people that already migrated are more aware they're more aware of how the information that you provide relates to actual conditions or their chances. Or maybe those people think that information is not particularly useful because there are other types of conditions that might be more relevant for them. So I think this would be a cool thing to explore. I think figure A9 is great. You presented that figure here, but you have it in the appendix in the paper. I would promote it and I would discuss the findings further, right? When you break it down by region, I would do that. And finally, I think that the section on moderating factors could also have more detail and more explicit assumptions. Like this is exactly the type of comparison that we're making, and this is how we're doing it. Overall, I think this is a great paper. I think, yeah, I would just focus on framing it better and comparing what you find with what the literature has found. And yeah, other than that, really cool. I think that this paper has a very promising future. Congratulations to you and to your co-authors.
Thank you, Ernesto. I mean, Sarah, if you want to have a few minutes to reply to some of the comments, and then we can take questions from other panelists and other people in the audience.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ernesto. That's really helpful. Maybe one slide, one short comment on your concern. Why do we observe only an effect on people who underestimate in Ghana but overestimate in Uganda? So this is only the case for intentions, right? For destination preference, we see a very homogeneous pattern across the both countries. And to come to the question why we observe this heterogeneous results for migration intentions, I think this really comes back to what you also mentioned in your discussion, that Uganda and Ghana, the sample, are just really different from each other. And that's one potential explanation why we might observe these differences. But I wouldn't say that this is actually a problem, that the Ugandan sample is very different from the Ghanaian sample, because we always run regressions separately. So we never run regressions jointly for Ghana and Uganda, exactly for this reason, because they are just too different, the two samples. And that's also one reason why sometimes it's a bit hard to compare the results. Okay, why is it like this in Uganda? Why is it different in Ghana? One explanation might simply be, okay, because the samples are different. And yeah, with regards to the sample size, yeah, we didn't have influence on that. So that's how many people registered for the different skills training programs. And that's what we worked with. But yeah, thanks a lot for your comments, especially to contrast the results more with what previous literature has found. I think that's very important. Yeah, thanks a lot. And now I will take further comments from the audience.
Yes, Felix?
Hi, thanks, Sarah. I was wondering if you could maybe use this fake information a bit, because it's actually quite interesting that some people, and especially those who had that as first preference, received kind of fake information. So whether they update differently or something.
Sorry, could you repeat the first part?
Whether you could make a bit more use of the fact that this one region had wrong information. Because I think that's quite a unique setting to have that some received correct information and some wrong. The mistake about Ashanti region.
Yeah, thanks.
Do we have other questions or comments? I just have out of curiosity. I mean, you explain in the paper that the sample that you use are not representative of the total population of Ghana or Uganda. And yeah, in terms of education, work, and these kind of things, are you able to compare them in terms of migration intentions? I don't know, like using either surveys looking at intentions or of either internal or international migration, or looking at migration history, so that we can sense a bit more how likely they are to migrate, maybe?
So my intuition would be that those are the ones who migrate the most, because we have a heavily male sample. We have skilled male in urban areas, which are typically the characteristics that correlate most strongly with migration. But yeah, that would be one thing we could add.
And another comment: is there a reason why there was not a follow-up for the Ugandan case? Because I thought it was really interesting, because in one case you have in-person interview, and in the other case you have a phone interview. And I was just thinking about getting an interview and then like information experiment over the phone. And maybe it's also quite difficult for like individuals to process the information and integrate this new elements to their information set. And I would have been interested to like explicitly looking at longer term effects on people receiving the interview over the phone. So was there a reason for not having a follow-up?
Yeah, so it's basically because when we conducted the experiment in Uganda, this was already the follow-up for these people. So the experiment took place within the questionnaires for this program evaluation, and while in Ghana it was the baseline, so when they registered for the program. In Uganda it was the end line, so they had already participated in the program, and then it was the end line for the program evaluation, so we didn't have the chance to contact them again. Yeah, that's the simple reason. Yeah, but I completely agree. It would have been very nice to also follow up on them. Yeah.
Do we have other comments or questions?
Just out of curiosity, is there a difference between treated and non-treated in effective migration once you take the subsample of people that wanted to migrate before the information was given, or still no difference?
So we didn't check that, but so I don't think that there will be a difference, because only such a small percentage share of individuals didn't want to migrate at all at the baseline. So we also run heterogeneity analysis depending on their intentions to migrate, yes or no, and it basically didn't make sense, because the sample of those who didn't want to migrate was just too small that we couldn't run the regressions.
I see. And also another question, I don't really recall well if people on the medium income regions are less precise in their beliefs than people in like high income or very low income regions, because like we can think that, you know, if you are in the highest region of the country, or you also know if you are in the poorest region of your country, but if you're in the middle, maybe it's less clear for you. So it will mean that people in very high or very low income regions do not benefit that much from information, while it benefits the most to people in medium income region, who will drive the overall effect.
Yeah, so we did something similar by excluding those individuals who live in the region with the highest income. We did not yet do it for those who live in the region with the smallest income, but I don't know whether this makes sense, because I mean, for those who would expect the largest effects, right? To exclude them, I mean, whether this makes sense, but yeah.
Just like maybe first to look if, like, I don't really from your graphs, if people from medium income regions are more or less likely to be precise in their beliefs compared.
So what we did is to compare whether there's a home bias, basically. So whether they are more accurate, whether they have more accurate expectations for the region they live in versus the regions they don't live in. And while for one of the countries we slightly observe it, for the other country we don't. And right now I don't recall which country was it, but it was not strong at all. So this home bias is so when we run regressions on it, it's not significant. It's just a very, very tiny little difference, and only in one country, but not in the other.
Okay, I see. Thanks.
So if yes, Felix, go ahead.
You also have information on international intentions?
Sorry, again?
I'm sorry, my sound. I was wondering whether you have information on international migration intentions.
Yes, we do have.
Could you also use that as an outcome?
We used it as an outcome. It doesn't have any effect. We also used it for heterogeneity analysis. It doesn't make a difference.